Tonight, you're used to seeing me in a different location, but tonight, I just got to talk to you about some things that's been on my mind. There are a lot of things that don't seem connected, but they are. And so, political issues and other things, but I just want to say this. You wouldn't think that abortion, mass incarceration, the 2008 mortgage crisis, voting rights legislation, and all of those things are connected. But here's how they're connected. The politicians used abortion, conservatives used abortion as a means to gain a constituency. They were able to gain white evangelical Christians around and to enlist them in their fight against abortion, but it really was about power. It had nothing at all to do with whether they care about the birth of children or how children are going to function. This is about unadulterated power.
The Supreme Court's draft decision to overturn Roe v. Wade is top of mind across the nation right now. The history shows that the pioneers of the evangelical movement, for people like Jerry Falwell, segregation was a motivating factor long before abortion was. In fact, in 1973, when the Supreme Court decided Roe v. Wade, evangelicals weren't exactly motivated by Roe. In fact, the former president of America's largest Protestant denomination, the Southern Baptist Convention, actually endorsed the ruling, Roe v. Wade. He said, quote, "I've always felt that it was only after a child was born and had a life separate from its mother that it became an individual person. And it has always, therefore, seemed to me that what is best for the mother and the future should be allowed," end quote. In fact, in 1971, before the decision in Roe v. Wade, that same Protestant group resolved to seek pro-abortion legislation, allowing the procedure in certain cases, and they reaffirmed that resolution in the year after Roe, in 1974, pushing for legislation that would allow people to choose abortion in specific instances. It was not until years after the Roe ruling that the evangelical movement decided that coalescing around abortion was the way to unify religious groups and gain political power. The anger of evangelicals was activated by segregation, but continued segregation would prove to be a less than palatable way to motivate evangelical voters on a broad scale, not enough to win elections with. So that's where the issue of abortion came in. Senate races in Minnesota and Iowa in 1978 showed that an anti-abortion, pro-life movement could unite the religious right and give them real political power. In Minnesota, pro-life Republicans won 2 Senate seats. In Iowa, the Democratic incumbent, Senator Dick Clark, was expected to win by a landslide. He did not, primarily due to the work of mostly Catholic pro-life activists. Clark had supported federal funding for abortions for low-income women. He had opposed an amendment that would restrict abortions, so anti-abortion activists rallied support to vote him out.
The anti-abortion movement has political clout. That surprised a lot of journalists and political analysts who believed those people made a lot of noise, but not much difference.
After those 1978 races, those people resolved to make a whole lot more noise, and in a very organized way. In a letter to fellow conservatives, or to a fellow conservative, another conservative activist and the leader of the religious right, Paul Weyrich, characterized those anti-abortion victories as, quote, "true cause for celebration." Another conservative activist predicted that opposition to abortion would, quote, "pull together many of our fringe Christian friends," end quote. But that was the plan, to bottle up all of that ire that evangelicals felt about segregation and concentrate it on abortion, making sweeping moral arguments against health care that they claimed was founded in religion. That was the plan to build political power, and Republican politicians campaigned accordingly. In 1980, the Republican candidate for president, Ronald Reagan, campaigned on a constitutional amendment prohibiting abortion. It's one of the issues that helped send him to the White House. He gained the support of those opposed to abortion, and he won the presidency, ousting Jimmy Carter. The 1980s saw the Reagan administration focus increasingly on abortion and the rise of the Federalist Society and a trend toward strict textualists like this man, Robert Bork, a failed Supreme Court nominee who criticized the justice who wrote the Brown v. Board decision. That trend continued through the Trump administration. In 2015, Trump courted and forged a coalition with the religious right, with figures like Jerry Falwell Jr., to secure their backing and their funding. He notoriously released a list of conservative justices whom he would nominate if elected. His then running mate pledged during their campaign that their judicial nominees would bring an end to Roe once and for all. And they did. Trump appointed 3 conservative judges. And this week, with the leaked draft opinion condemning Roe to the, quote, ash heap, we can see how this all is very likely to shake out. With Roe gone, minority women will likely bear the brunt of this new upcoming restriction on their health care in roughly half the country, not to mention the fact that the draft opinion is written in a way that could dismantle other rights. Things like the right to same-sex marriage, the right to contraception, interracial marriage, privacy, all of these things are now on the table. The religious right charted this course decades ago in their anger over segregation to build power on the back of abortion and dismantle the rights they don't care for. And so far, it seems to be working.
And so right now what we have is the leaked decision by the Supreme Court is written in such a way that if it was not specifically spelled out in the Constitution, we're not guaranteed that as a right. So that could mean anything. The only people that were we the people in the Constitution were white land-owning males. White male landowners. That didn't include women of any race. It certainly didn't include Black men, and it didn't include minority men or women at all. So if you can begin to roll back rights based on the fact that it wasn't specifically spelled out in the Constitution, that opens the door to taking everybody's right.
Conservative opposition to abortion is not necessarily about religion or conservative values. It's about power.
Absolutely. And then more than that, Allie, it is about power of the minority over a rising majority. You have to remember, at the time all of these machinations were going on, what was happening? What was the backdrop in American culture? You had the rise of women's liberation. You had the Black Power movement. You had the pill, the widely available contraception. So sexual liberation, gay rights. It was all threatening the hegemonic grip that the white patriarchy had enjoyed since the beginning of the United States as we know it. And all of that was being threatened in the moment that there was a sort of craven decision to weaponize abortion as the tip of the spear to roll back decades of social progress. And I think the lesson that we have to learn from that is, although they would want us to believe that this leaked decision, should it come to pass, is endgame and they will stop with abortion, abortion is and always has been a Trojan horse for a desperate cling to power by the white patriarchy in a country that is rapidly and has been rapidly changing for decades.
That's a remarkable thing for a lot of people to think about, because one doesn't think about the elimination of Roe v. Wade as a Trojan horse. They think of that as the end game. They think of that as the capture of the whole thing. Tell me what you mean by Trojan horse. What do you believe in this quest for power is in danger?
It's an excellent question. And allow me to say, because it's very important, that if it was only abortion, that should be enough, right?
Yes.
Abortion is a fundamental freedom that has to be embraced by our nation as a core value in order to actually aspire to that promise of democracy, justice, and human empowerment. So, or whether you just look at the actual decision and the way it's come down, it is written in such a way that nothing is sacrosanct. that all of these rights that we have achieved for groups that lived on the margins of society because they were not written into the Constitution the way white men were, all of those rights are in jeopardy. And let's be clear, one of the things that we have always said is if you don't have the power of the majority with you, and by the way, the legal right to abortion has always been a popular opinion with the majority. Pre-Roe, when Roe came down, and it is today. But when you don't have the power of the majority, what do? You resort to disinformation, which abortion disinformation predated COVID disinformation by a lot. They traveled a lot of the same vectors. Voter suppression always goes hand in hand with robbing women of reproductive freedom and court capture. And we may be at the end game of court capture unless we make some radical and dramatic changes, but we are not at the end game of what this court will dismantle in terms of rights of others that they did not recognize in the originalist version of the Constitution.
So let's talk about
when they said that nobody had to worry about them coming after Roe v. Wade. We were being hysterical. People were being hysterical. Well, guess what? They're coming for Roe v. Wade. But that's not the big issue. The issue is the destruction of the middle class. The issue is conservative and liberal are terms that have been used all over this world to create autocracies and to put people into governments that look like democracies, but in reality, they're really not. Russia would be a place you can think of where they have elections, but those elections don't actually matter because the outcome is already determined. In our country, we have election deniers who say that the 2020 election was stolen from the Republicans, in particular Donald Trump. Well, they have since put laws on the books in swing states to ensure that if the legislature doesn't like the outcome of the election, they have the ability to simply send it back to the state legislatures and have them to overturn and select the winner of elections. That is the most undemocratic thing I've ever heard of, but it's been a plan. So if you think and understand that they're trying to put us in a position where only white male landowners have power, they're well on their way. Why? Let me give you an example of why they don't want student loan debt forgiven. When you buy a home, there's something called a back-end ratio, meaning that by the time you get this loan, once you make your payment, the amount of debt that you have and the bills that you have to pay, they don't want it to be more than roughly 35% of your income, including your mortgage, because they know that if you're paying more than that, the likelihood you're a higher risk for failing on your loan. So what do? They say, well, this is one way to keep the marginalized folks that were able to go to school. They had to take out a lot of debt. They weren't wealthy. Their parents didn't have trust funds for them. They weren't legacies at Harvard and Yale. And they had to take out debt in order to pay for college, which is what they say we should do. Go to school, get a good education, go to college, come out, get a good job, buy a home, have 2.5 kids. Well, now they are saying, maybe not.
How do you feel about the American dream? The idea of it?
I love it. I lived it. My family immigrated to this country.
Do you still believe in it?
Well, I'm a numbers guy, and so the numbers say that you have a 50-50 chance of doing better than your parents if you're born in the 90s. And that chance was 93% if you were born in the 40s or 50s. So the American dream is dying by the numbers, and Americans know it.
Maybe you should just rent the American dream. They did a story on 60 Minutes with a corporate landowner, and most of the corporations are buying up the single family homes, starter homes that the starter families used to buy in the suburbs, and all of the places in the country where couples that are out of college, now they want to start a family, they want to buy a home. They're buying those homes faster than citizens can buy the homes. And what they did in the 2008 mortgage crisis was this. They gave loans to people they know could not afford those loans. They gave them on something called stated income. So just because I said this is the amount of money I have, then that means that this is how much I can afford. They issued those loans with what's called variable interest rates. So that means that your interest rate can go up, it can go down, but if it goes up, your payment goes up. If it goes down, your payment goes down. And what they did is they gave out these loans, millions of loans across the country. And then they decided, well, we're going to raise the interest rate. They foreclosed on the properties, which they knew the people would default because they couldn't afford it in the first place. And then they foreclosed, and the only people who could buy those properties were corporate entities.
So really, what do you own at the end of the day? You really don't own anything. All you are is indentured to somebody else for the privilege of using it. And that's what ended up happening here. And sooner or later, the party ended where the bank said, can't do it no more. And that's when the big crash started. You know, it was irresponsible lending. They did things here called liar's loans and things that they called them stated income loans. When they would say, okay, well, we need to know how much money you make. And you say, well, I made $100,000. Do you have any type of, do you have your tax statements from last year? Do you have paycheck stubs? No, I don't have any of that. Okay, well, we'll just take you on a stated loan, which means the guy's got no way of really, proving that he has $100,000 of income a year. But because he said he did, we're just going to put that down and base the loan on that. So none of these loans are based on sound fiscal responsibility, on any financial judgment whatsoever. And not only that, but whenever there was a roadblock that was designed to safeguard the loan process, they found a way to circumvent it. So it got to a point, really, guys, if you can go in and fog and mirror, you got the loan. So
the big issue in America is money. It is money and power. And it is not about the issues. It's not about abortion. They don't care about babies. They don't care even about guns, if you can believe that. They don't care. Those are issues, hot button issues that keep those in power, and that is conservative and liberal. It is not relegated to one party or the next. The power structure, part of what is built in is also the notion that others are the problem. This is the system that, unfortunately, white males have been telling other poor white people and women are their issue. If it weren't for the others, for the minorities, if it weren't for the undocumented immigrants, you wouldn't have the problem, or you wouldn't be struggling the way that you're struggling. The reality is that those people have never amassed enough power to affect the lives of white male landowners or wealthy whites or even poor whites. So what happens is those people support the power structure against their own interests. The issue of abortion. The states, if they're going to send the issue of abortion back to the states, guess who's going to suffer? The women that vote for the Republicans, the GOP in those states in the middle of America. The liberals that they think they're going to own by overturning Roe v. Wade, that they're going to keep them out of power from doing that. The women, the poor people in their states will still be able to have access to legal, safe abortion. It's going to be the 8 or 9-year-old little girl in red state America that is molested by her cousin, that is being forced to have and rear a child as the result of rape and incest. It's not going to be the libs that you're owning. It's going to be your own people, your own women. And I've heard it said, oh, well, I don't want to pay for your abortion. Listen, you haven't been paying for people's abortions anyway. it's been against the federal law, and those states that those people who say that live in, their states typically don't agree to pay for it anyway. So there's no scenario where you're going to be paying for somebody else's abortion. It's just not the case. But it's not even about what you think it's about. It's about you continuing to keep those people in power. So if I can keep you from and reduce the number of people who own property, the real estate agents will tell you that they get so many corporate offers, they can't even get offers. They don't even have to advertise the way that they used to. So now they have the opportunity to just buy up all of this land, and guess what? Those properties will never go back in the possession or control of the average citizen in this country, because they're also raising the cost of rents, which affects homelessness. And now they're claiming, oh, homelessness is such a big problem in democratic cities and such. Of course it is. I can tell you in Los Angeles, we have units that were so expensive that sat vacant because people can't afford them, but we have a huge homeless problem. So the issues don't necessarily seem to coincide, but if I can make abortion illegal, and I can criminalize women for having abortions, I can criminalize doctors for giving abortions, I can criminalize anybody that helps a person to get an abortion. If I can do that, now I have people in prisons that I can now use for cheap labor. Because remember, the 13th Amendment said you can only be enslaved as crime for punishment. So now it's not just poor people that are being put in prison. Now I have access to free labor from doctors, maybe lawyers, people who fly planes. There's no end to the caliber of people. But if I can control that as cheap labor, then mass incarceration, abortion, they are connected. I can keep people, the wealth. One of the most common ways for people to go from marginal income to generating generational wealth was through land ownership. It was through real estate. And in 2008, when they started giving those stated loans and they foreclosed on millions of pieces of land in this country, those families' generational wealth was cut off. They no longer have it. So now they're not landowners. I went to college, I'm educated, I can read, because remember, they're also trying to do away with public education, trying not intentionally not to educate our citizens and our children. They don't mind them being slaughtered in elementary schools, but they do mind if they're educated. So we need to not educate them. But the ones who are able to sneak by and get educated, we need them not to be landowners if we're trying to go back to the strictest interpretation of the Constitution of the United States. That's problematic. The Supreme Court is saying that if it wasn't specifically spelled out, it is not a guaranteed right in the United States. Think about how many things are not spelled out in the Constitution, because there was no anticipation. Though some things, the technology that we have now didn't even exist at that point. But now, if it wasn't the strictest writing and lettering, so now it doesn't apply, that puts everybody in jeopardy. That puts everybody in jeopardy.
Republicans claim they're just listening to the concerns of their voters and restoring trust in our elections. Well, that's rubbish. The real purpose of these restrictions is to hamper voting by Black people, people of color, young people, and lower-income Americans. After Black voters and organizers in Georgia flipped the state blue for the first time in decades, the GOP is pulling out all the stops to prevent the same thing from happening in other states. The situation is even more dire given the upcoming once-in-a-decade redistricting process, allowing Republican-controlled states to further gerrymander congressional districts. Their assault on the right to vote is a coordinated national strategy led by top party leaders and outside dark money advocacy groups like the Heritage Foundation. That group is working directly with state legislatures to provide them with model legislation and gearing up to spend $24 million in 8 states to advance these bills ahead of the midterms. Unless the For the People Act becomes law, these restrictive state bills will go into effect before the upcoming 2022 midterm elections and entrench Republican power for years to come. So it's essential we protect voting rights now while we still can.
In 2021, there's a list that's compiled every year of democracies and the state of democracies. And this, in 2021, the United States was, for the first time ever in the history of them chronicling democracies, was put on the list of sliding democracies. That means that it's in jeopardy of failing. It's not yet a failing democracy, but it's sliding, and a few things here and there, like being able to overturn the votes of the people and send it back to the state legislators to allow them to select the electors and select our president and select and overturn elections at local levels. So what do we have? You can, once you start putting those things in place, let me say this. All of the things that failed, that saved our democracy in 2020, it was a very intentional plan. Those things, they have put laws in place to intend that it will work the next time. It will work the next time because they put laws. So when people were talking about how silly elements of the voting rights law in Georgia, for example, making it a crime to hand out water to people standing in line, I was incensed because I kept thinking, but that's not the problem with the law. That's not the big issue. I don't care. People can bring their own water. But if after they vote and somebody decides, no, I don't like who you voted for, that is the most undemocratic thing you can think of. But that's what states in the United States have put on the books since 2020. There are over 400, some of them proposed. But these are the things that were put in place. But it's not about who can vote. It's that if, in fact, I can tell you that your vote, I can nullify your vote, even at the local level, then I get to control everything. I can gerrymander districts, maps, so that people of minority persuasion no longer have representation. They can't have their own representation. All I have to do is claim fraud, and then I can just overturn what they did, or I can take it out of the hands of election officials and we can decide. That's all undemocratic. And this channel typically is about healing. But how are we going to heal when we have elected officials who place money and power over the lives of our children? Don't tell me that it's not about guns. But guess what? The big thing is that the reason we can't get any gun reform or simple background checks that 90% of Americans want is because it's not guns, it's mental health. These are mentally ill people. Okay, well, let's go back to, well, then let's fix that. But you haven't proposed any legislation for that either. Ronald Reagan closed down the hospitals and facilities that treated and housed mentally ill people in the 80s. He closed them down and threw them on the street. And that's why all across this country, in large numbers, the homeless tend to be their high percentage have mental illness. But you're not trying to fix the problem. Because if you were, then why aren't you working on mental health issues? Now, when the Democrats say, oh, well, then let's defund the police, which was a stupid term. Somebody said that and they allowed it to be used. That was just idiotic on their part, because I live in the ghetto, have lived in a ghetto most of my life, and I want law enforcement. I probably have as many law enforcement officers' phone numbers in my cell phone as I do thugs and criminals, okay? Because I work with that population. But what I do know is that I want to be safe in my community as well. We need law enforcement. But in most places, for example, in Uvalde, Texas, where the mass shooting was, 40% of all of their tax dollars goes to the police department. 40%. Well, if you're not going to give them laws that allow them to prosecute people and keep people safe from gun violence, then you need to take some of that money and put it into mental health. But then you said, oh, that's anti-police. But yet you stormed the Capitol and the police were beaten and killed. So it's not about the issues. And they have Americans hung up, and I'm talking conservatives and liberals, have people hung up on terminology. But I'm not listening, and I sound like a liberal, right? I know that's what I sound like. But understand this. Neither side is doing the right thing here. Everybody has to understand our babies are dying. Remember this, as long as it was inner city gang members dying from gun violence, nobody cared. As long as it's those people in that black church for prayer, it doesn't mean anything. The kids in Columbine, that's 1999. Nothing. But when liberals ask for money for mental health, guess what's wrong with them? The people who can really help won't ever get the money. The large corporate donors get a hold of that money too. We have a huge problem. But with my tax dollars, I would rather my tax dollars go to a poor woman in the hollows of West Virginia or the hood here to pay for an abortion so that they don't have to have a baby that they can't afford, that has to go into a home because they swear there's all these places and group homes and stuff. Black children at the age of 3 in 1996, black boys were already considered too old to be adopted. What does that mean? That means that little black boys could not be adopted. They were too old and had to stay in the system and in group homes. Now we got a formula shortage. Who's gonna feed all these babies? Now you forcing them to be nursemaids again? Don't sound like slavery to me. And now they mad with me about that, right? Critical race theory. Listen, critical race theory is taught in colleges and not even taught in schools. But people are allowed to use the issues that they want for political gain and power. It is not about the people. It is not about what you think it's about. And I don't think either conservative or liberals are totally truthful and honest. I don't trust any of them at some level. There are some people who go into politics really with a desire to help. I have been prodded to run for office, and I'd probably win in my local area. But I don't want to go into that system because it becomes a vicious cycle of campaigns. And when the Democrats propose to get dark money out of elections and create a part of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and all of those things and the legislation that they wanted to pass early in 2020, those things would have taken the dark money out. That's what they don't want. And it may not just be the conservatives. The liberals at some level don't want it either. You always hear the media saying, well, it may not just be Cinnamon and Manchin. Because they're taking the heat. It may not just be Republicans. Yes, there are a lot of Democrats that their issue is their corporate donors get the money, and the problem persists on the ground. We have a guy running for mayor in LA who is a billionaire. who has been in this city for decades, who is saying that he is going to take care of homelessness when he's elected. You've had $1 billion and you haven't built a single shelter yet? How many homeless shelters have you funded? I'm not talking about going down to the Mission in Skid Row and handing out food that somebody else donated. If you got billions, why haven't you done that already? I'm not talking about listening to what you're talking about. I'm watching what you do. People say, well, yeah, like I say, I probably sound like a bleeding heart liberal, but this is the thing. What we have now is not sustainable. What we have now is not sustainable. It's not a democracy. It's not even a democratic republic. Because the people that think they super smart, oh, we're not in a democracy anyway. Yeah, whatever you want to call it. It's not working. Anytime 90% of people want background checks, but we can't get it passed through our legislators that we voted for and sent, and they're using our tax dollars. More than something like 70% of people didn't want Roe v. Wade overturned. That's the majority of people in the country. But our legislators don't care. Our legislators do what they want because their corporate donors want what they want. The corporate donors don't want them to stop corporate swallowing up of property. Because again, it's about control. And if they're going to take us back to only landowners have rights, and it's not that far-fetched, don't say I'm being hyperbolic and whatever. I'm looking at what they're doing. I'm looking at the legislation that's being passed. I'm looking at how they're looking for ways to start more mass incarceration. Okay, they had to clean out in California in particular. They had to let out a lot of overcrowding, so they let a lot of people out. Well, guess what? If they start criminalizing abortions and things like that, which thankfully California probably won't, but all across the country they've let people out. Now these are ways to fill it back up. Some of it is going to be the task force to criminalize the people who got probably $5 more of COVID relief money instead of the corporations who took billions of dollars that was designated for small businesses. They're not going to prosecute them because the legislatures, and particularly under the Trump administration, gutted particular agencies to make sure that they didn't have the money and the funding and the expertise on hand in order to prosecute these things. So the only people they can go after are the mid-level folks. The folks like me who can't afford a $200 an hour, $300 an hour lawyer to defend me. And so they'll take my stuff from me. But these are the kinds of things that, so again, it is not about the issues. It is about the power structure in this country and who's going to run things. And whether we like it or not, I just have to call it like it is. Our structure was built in white supremacy, on the notion that white males are the ones who know what's best for everybody else. And if the opinion in Roe v. Wade becomes law, and it's the way it's written, that will be used in the future as precedent to overturn long-standing law. There's terms for it. I'm not even going to bother to go into it because you don't care. But just know this, that it will allow them to overturn things that we have lived with, including, because there's already articles they intend to come for birth control. They're now calling it, as opposed to birth control, they're now calling it abortion-inducing medication. Go back and look at Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation hearings. He started referring to it as abortion-inducing medication. Articles, they've already come out and said, oh, we're going after Plan B pills, all of those things. They're all on the line. So when they say, well, just practice safe sex and abstain and all that, guess what? Yeah, okay, but now I'm raped. So how do I stop that? Rape has never stopped from the beginning of time. And so, again, it is to keep people out of the middle class. It is to eradicate that so that there's only wealthy and poor. And the wealthy make the decisions, which is a very small minority, and the poor can only be in service to the wealthy. Now, I'm not an anti-gun person, but we cannot act as if guns are not a problem. We are the only country in the world, the only one, that has the phenomenon of mass shootings that we have. I had somebody say, well, you can't legislate it, and if you take their guns, then it'll be nice. But guess what? You can't kill 21 people in less than an hour with a knife. If a person wants to get into your home, your alarm is not going to stop that. It may slow them down, but it's not going to stop it. But there's sure a lot of people out here with alarms on their houses, aren't there? It doesn't stop people from buying them. Seatbelts never stopped people from dying or from drunk driving. It sure slowed it. The law sure slowed it down by all of those laws that were put on the books that made it costly to have DUIs. But the seatbelt, we don't argue about the seatbelt. We don't argue about the seatbelt. It may not stop it, but it sure can help people from dying if they're in the crash based with the drunk driver. So don't tell me that legislation is not the answer. If you're telling me, because one of the things that they say is, this is a mental health issue. Well, fix it. Fix that. Where's the legislation to fix that? Show me what you've done since Columbine. Let's just go to Columbine. Show me the legislation you have to fix the problem with mental health so that they can stop killing our babies. So that children between the age of 7, 8, 9, and 10 can go to school and come home at the end of the day. These are children. They shouldn't have to know how to duck and hide and barricade themselves in a room for political gain, money, and power. The issue is the average citizen, and I will tell anybody that will listen, it is the silence of the average citizen that has, and the well-meaning people who support the policies that kill our people. It's very much economic. It is even more than race. It's economic. It's just that race was used in America as a way to differentiate poor white people from poor black people and minorities so that the poor white people can continue to support the wealthy white people. It's just the way that it is. Don't be mad at me. Look at the structure. That's just the history. You can even see it today. So, again, I say, it's not necessarily about the issues. It's about power. It's about power and it's about money. And so abortion, the mortgage crisis, not forgiving student loan debt, single family home, not making single family homes affordable to people, the corporate sucking up of all of our land and real estate. All of these things are connected. And if you haven't been caught up in the tragedy of any of the issues that I just mentioned, mass incarceration, abortion, financial crisis, student loan, predatory student loans, if you haven't been caught up in any of those yet, the victim of a mass shooting, gun violence, you're extremely blessed and extremely rare in the United States of America. Don't take it for granted, but just know this. It won't stop with us. It's coming for you too. It's coming for you too. And a lot of the people that think and support this lean or this push toward autocracy, they think they're going to be on the winning side. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. How do you think, as a poor person living in the rural area in North Carolina, you're voting for these people, and you're never going to be in their class. They're going to make sure anything you can do to get a leg up, inflation, all these different things. Oh yeah, it's all connected. So just know this: they're not just coming for the others; they're coming for you too. The only thing you will wind up being is labor. You're a vehicle. You're a means to an end. They don't care about you and your children. And I can't stress enough, this is not relegated to one side or the other. They all have their politicians by nature. And it's our fault because by nature, Citizens United, which allowed corporations to invest in our elections, is the reason we're in as big a mess as we're in right now. Because you don't have to know who's behind all the ads that you see. You don't have to know who's really behind things. All you have to do is just believe and listen and take their word for it. So I just say to you guys, remember, when you're arguing and when you're calling names to people who don't agree with you, it's not about either one of you guys. And neither one of you guys or your positions can fix it until we fix the structure in this country, which has allowed money to be the thing that runs the country. I'm irritated. I'm heartbroken. I'm enraged that 19 babies won't get to grow up. But they're not just the 19 babies. Every kid in that classroom now lives with the trauma of being in that school that day. All of those families, they say how the media reports how the families, it's a small community. Everybody in the town knows somebody who was affected and directly affected by the mass shooting in that town. But guess what? Those are not the only lives, because they have cousins and aunties and uncles and people they went to school with all across the country. They're all affected. When you affect an entire community, you're affecting everyone, and nobody escapes. Nobody escapes. So again, I'm just want you to understand what we're really dealing with. If we want to fight something, that's what we need to be fighting. And I didn't even mean to go on this long, but I'm just enraged. I'm tired. What we have now going on is not sustainable. And anybody that comes and they want to call me names and say I'm this, it's not going to fix it for me or your children. So let's look at some solutions. Okay, we're not going to have background checks because these are mentally ill people. Can we have some mental health legislation? Can we have some resources put into mental health then? And make sure it gets down to the people at the bottom, the people on the ground, at the local level in the communities, that it's not only 5 or 6 major organizations or entities that can access the money for mental health. The baby formula shortage was created because only 4 companies in the United States manufacture 98% of baby formula made in this country and distributed and consumed in the country. So when the largest one that has about 42% of the market stopped producing, shortage, those corporations had their, I don't know whether they're conservative or liberal, they could be both, the candidates that they put in place help to make sure that they're the only ones that can compete. There's no pull yourself up by your bootstraps in America. It's nonsense. They make sure that you can't. They're making sure that we can't, and we have got to realize what's going on and stop looking at these cultural issues and arguing with each other. The reality is that we're all suffering. And again, this channel is devoted to healing. But I'm outraged. I'm outraged today. This is not a joke. 19 children will not grow up. It's not right. And I want us to stop looking at things in such a narrow way. A lot of people don't have time to care about politics. Oh, I don't talk politics or religion, but you're living the results of both. Because the evangelical Christian decided that whether or not a woman has an abortion is more important than whether or not legislation actually happens in this country and whether the government is responsive to the needs of its people. And they have turned a blind eye to, let's face it, they made a God out of a 3 times married, self-admitted sexual predator as their hero, because Mitch McConnell helped him illegally steal the right, just violate the Constitution, and with the ability to put in Supreme Court justices so that they could literally overturn the right to have an abortion. Now, whether or not a woman in New York has an abortion does not affect the day-to-day life of a single white evangelical Christian in the Midwest, because they're not paying for it. They're also not paying to take care of their children, because we can't have free childcare. And I'm not saying that necessarily free childcare is the answer, but when it's proposed, low-cost childcare, making it affordable, nothing has ever been done about the cost of pharmaceuticals, the cost of medication in this country. That's one of the fastest things that causes people to file bankruptcy and wipes out generational wealth, wipes out people in the middle class. All of these things are connected, and we have got to start looking at it holistically and stop getting stuck in the name calling and the crisis of the moment. But we can't become numb to the fact that these are people's children, and these are lives and families that will never be the same. They will never be the same. So it's time for us to pay attention. It's time for us to pay attention. And I hope that you continue to come back. Please put your comments in. Talk to me. Talk back to me. Let me know what you're thinking. And again, Free to Heal, you can check us out on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Check us out.